Today on Constructive Interference, what is love? Well, here we are, smack dab between Mother's Day and Father's Day, and family is at the forefront of everybody's minds. And so we thought, hey, what's the greatest thing that we could possibly discuss in this week's podcast? And 10 out of 10 country songs and pop songs and Hollywood stars and hit movies and cultural icons all agreed that we should talk about love. And then, there was some mild disagreement among metal stars. Some of them just wanted the whole blood and vengeance thing instead. But no, we're going with love, okay? So if there is a more abused term, or has been at least for the duration of my lifetime, than love, I don't know what it would be. Now, granted, I'm a sheltered homeschooler, so I'm sure there might be other ones out there that I was not exposed to. But man, the word love has just gotten dragged one way and another down the road my entire life. Is that kind of your experience too, Josh?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, if one thing, the word is so vague, it can mean any of 25 different things depending on the context. So it's kind of problematic to begin with.
Well, are you one of those ones that's going to take us into the original Greek? Like, hey, well, in this language, it's got 25 different meanings, and in this one, it's got 14 different words that describe it.
I'm not educated, Joel. I can't do that.
Oh, okay. You're one of them uneducated folks. No, I mean that's valid. Like, a lot of people do go the linguistic route, especially in Christian communities and churchy communities, right? Because then they're like, well, love doesn't really. It can mean all of these different things, and actually, interestingly, there's a great book by C.S. Lewis called The Four Loves. And it's called that because he talks about 4 different kinds of love. And if you're interested in that, it's a terrific read. But it's kind of stereotypical of the way people sort of overcomplicate it, in my opinion, and sort of break it down to, well, what does it really mean in all these things based on a couple of really key, philosophical thoughts about love. But in our day and age, that's manifested itself in some not so great philosophies and some not so great policies in some instances. And some of those were at the forefront within the last few weeks, right? Because the culture war is heating back up again. We've got abortion on the front burner again. We've got all the whole through intersectional, wokeness. We've got the whole trans, LGBTQIA, all the the acronyms of intersectionality,
plus
all coming together there. Yes, plus. I forgot the plus. How could I forget the plus?
Just say plus. We don't need the letters.
I have sinned. No,
plus rates.
Plus rates. Yes. So like all of those things though have moved from questions of romance and of feeling directly into the realm of public policy without really missing a beat. And I don't know about you. I feel like that's a little bit worrisome at times.
Well, it's very worrisome for several reasons. But like you just said, we've had this idea of love has become a matter of public policy because somehow throughout the course of American culture through the last 100 years or whatever, we've come to this to establish that love is some sort of a standard, that love is some sort of a way of defining ourselves. And I don't know when that came about, but it certainly is the case now. Like you said, if 10 out of 10 pop songs are about love. They're either about falling in love or about looking for someone to love or about being heartbroken because you're not in love or about being angry because you can't find love. And it's always somehow related to this idea that there is this one special person out there, and if you just find them, then you'll fall in love and your life will be solved. And that theme is, I can't even exaggerate how huge that theme is in our culture. Obviously you think of Disney movies, with the prince and the princess meet each other. Cinderella meets the prince at the ball and they fall in love. But it's really gone way beyond that. Do you remember, Joel, there was a movie, it starred Robin Williams. It was when I was in high school.
Oh, Aladdin, yes.
Not that one, not then. It was called What Dreams May Come. Did you see?
I never saw that one, but I've heard great things about it.
It was an interesting movie. It was famous primarily for its visuals. It was groundbreaking at the time for the way it used computer graphics. Mm-hmm. But basically, it's a movie about a guy who dies, and he goes to the afterlife. And I'm not going to go into the whole setup of what they think the afterlife is like. But long story short, there's this guy and his wife, and they both die. And the movie ends where both of them decide to be reincarnated. And they're going to be reincarnated and be born again on Earth, specifically so that they can meet and fall in love again, because that's what it's all about. They're living in this idyllic heavenly place where they can basically have whatever they want. That's what the afterlife is like in this movie, and that they're both already living there, but they decide, well, gee whiz, wouldn't it be great to fall in love again? So we're going to go back to Earth and get born again, and that's the point of it. And I wasn't a big fan of the movie. Like I said, it was very popular, but I was just really impressed by that. Just that even putting that from an eternal perspective, that in the perspective of this movie, What Dreams May Come, even in eternity, these people are like basically in heaven. And even there, this idea of falling in love is still what motivates them, and still what they want.
Yeah, I mean, it's deeply ingrained. It's deeply ingrained in our culture. And honestly, if I were taking a shot at it, I would say that it goes way, way, way beyond the last 100 years. I actually think that you can trace the roots of this all the way back to kind of the Romantic era, like 1770 on to about, middle 1800s. I mean, everything was romantic around that time. That's when a lot of these ideals were really, encapsulated. This is when a lot of the literature and the art and the music and all the different forms were centered around romance and passion and all of those things. And it wasn't just, interpersonal relationships either. I mean, this manifested itself in a lot of just general passion that I think Americans are particularly exposed to because of the American Revolution, right? That happened. I mean, it's not normal for any politician to stand up and say, give me liberty or give me death. Like, that's not a normal thing for anyone to say, right? But in the middle of a giant, well, right. but in the middle of this period, that was something that was, I mean, obviously not widespread. It was still a unique historical moment, but it wasn't entirely out of character for the rest of the revolution than, other revolutions that were happening at the time. This was the Romantic period, and that was the formative period of our country. It's when a lot of our ideals about things came into existence. And so I think you can trace the history even further back.
Yeah. Different kinds of passion, perhaps. But, I mean, I don't know why I didn't think of this. I'm just thinking of this just now. It's like Romeo and Juliet, of course. When was that? Mm-hmm. That Shakespeare was... See, if I were educated, I would know this. If I were an educated man, I could name you exactly like what year Romeo and Juliet was published and what order it was in. But I can't. I just know...
1400s?
Well, I think it was 1600s, I believe, is when the Elizabethan era, when Shakespeare was working.
Okay.
We'll look it up.
We'll do a little extra research on that one.
Yes, listeners, please comment on social media on this week's episode. Tell us exactly when Romeo and Juliet was written. But
to the Google.
To the Google. But so Romeo and Juliet obviously is the story about, this boy and this girl who fall in love, and this happens. They just meet each other basically, and within hours they're married. And within hours, they are so in love that ultimately they end up committing suicide because they can't be together, even though they've only known each other for less than a week. Now, I don't know if that was considered like freakish and stupid at the time, or if that was considered to be somehow normal. I know that cultures throughout, from all over the world and throughout history have had these stories about, the lovers who are so in love that they can't live without each other and they'll die or commit suicide or whatever to not be apart.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me that idea, that Romeo and Juliet, who, if they can't be together, there's no point in living. Like nowadays, the idea seems like it's really mainstreamed, and it mainstreamed to the point where I think it does show up in public policy. It's really, if you think about it, it's kind of weird that the big culture war public policy debates of our time all center around this idea of finding a person to love, whether it's gay rights or transgender rights, or even abortion. Obviously, people who are pro-abortion will say, well, it's all about a woman's right to control her own body. But when you come down to it, people need to have abortion because you feel like people need to have sex. People feel like they need to have sex. And
what? That doesn't have anything to do with it, does it?
Oh, Joel, I know you said you were homeschooled, but I thought you have learned these things at least. But yeah, so people are viewed as you got to have sex to fulfill yourself, because you got to have special relationship with a special person. Otherwise, you're not fulfilling any of your life meaning. And all of these issues, from abortion to gay rights, etc., really just stem from this idea, with people sort of defining themselves according to this feeling. Now, have you seen the movie When Harry Met Sally?
I know that I have. I don't know if I remember much about it. By the way, 1500s. We bracketed it.
1500s. Oh.
1500s.
Well, I do know what year Harry Met Sally came out. That was 1989, and
okay, so close.
Yeah. And now this movie is just immensely, hugely popular. I saw it a couple years ago because I had heard so much about it, heard it referenced so many times. I had heard that it was like the quintessential romantic comedy, one of the funniest movies ever. It was just brilliant, 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 all this stuff. So I thought, okay, I'll watch it so I can be culturally literate and educated. The same reason why I once listened to a Justin Bieber song.
Why do I get the feeling that you're about to crap on this movie really hard?
Oh, I think there was it's called foreshadowing in literature. You foreshadow what's going to happen. So I saw this movie When Harry Met Sally, and if you haven't seen it, that's okay. I'm not going to go into really deep detail about the plot, but basically it follows these two people, Harry and Sally, and the whole movie is basically just them sort of wandering around, aimlessly blundering through their lives. Harry gets married at one point. He gets divorced. Sally goes through a series of boyfriends. And basically the whole thing in the movie is all of the characters, Harry, Sally, and all their friends, they all just sort of are looking for some sort of meaning or purpose in their life, and they search for it through sex. And they all have sex with all these people, and none of them are ultimately made happy by it. And the story takes place over a period, if I recall, of about 10 years. And finally, at the end of the 10-year period, Harry and Sally realize that they are the one for each other. And then they fall in love, and then they're happy.
Aww.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm going to crap on this movie. I hated this movie. I thought this movie, the word that came to mind after watching When Harry Met Sally was this movie is morbid. Because these people wandering around in their pointless, sexualized lives, it's like, to me, it was like they were dead because they just don't have any point. It's like they're just not living for any reason. Their actions aren't motivated by any principle. They aren't trying to get anything they want. They're just sort of bumping around like that feather in Forrest Gump. It's like they're the feather. But then at the end of the movie, they fall in love. They find the one, and that's the happy ending.
Neo?
Let's not.
That would be the happy ending, wouldn't it? It's the end of the rule of the machines. I mean, that sounds great.
Well, yeah, I guess, but the machines were still ruling, like I said, because these people were acting like machines. But
I see.
But no, but the idea of finding the one, of finding the special person who you're supposed to fall in love with. I'm sure you've seen the movie The Princess Bride, Joel. Yes,
I absolutely have.
Okay, now The Princess Bride kind of goes
only
by
58 or 60 times.
Yeah, well, that's not inappropriate. I mean. So The Princess Bride, so I'm crapping on When Harry Met Sally because it portrays finding the one as like being the goal of their lives, and nothing is meaningful until they find the one. Princess Bride it almost has the same premise. You have these two people, Wesley and Buttercup, who are in love. They have true love. Why do they have true love? Well, they just do.
Because he did everything she said.
Sure, that's why.
Spoiler alert, but I mean the words "as you wish" apparently were what did it for her. So,
well, let's not analyze this too heavily. Basically, in the Princess Bride, Wesley and Buttercup are established to be in love because the voiceover at the beginning says so. And that's pretty much all there is to it. The voiceover says they're in love, and it's true love, and so it is because the narrator said it was. But
and who are you to argue with the narrator?
Yeah, but Princess Bride, it's funny because it's a satire. It's like poking fun at that idea, and that's why it's a funny movie, and why the idea of these two people having true love is humorous because it's not taken seriously. It's poking fun at the idea. It's showing how it's implausible, and that's the basis of the humor. Whereas the movie where Harry Met Sally, these people are taking this idea seriously. It's like Harry and Sally watched The Princess Bride, and then instead of taking it as a funny satire, they took it as advice for how they should really live. And they got to find the one, otherwise their life is pointless.
Okay, so here comes the tricky part, right? Like I know now we're we're in between Mother's Day and Father's Day. We're not at Valentine's Day, but you've got all of these, normal Americans, and I think probably both of us at some point, we're both married, right? Like, we know it's relatable to have that fall in love moment, right? And so I guess for people that are listening to this, like, here we are talking about how, this is a terrible idea, this is a terrible concept, but why? Like, what do we have wrong about the whole fall in love concept as Americans?
Well, obviously just because feelings are bad and we should be mechanical.
Well, not all of us are you, Josh.
Oh, wow. All right.
just kidding. I actually think we're probably pretty well matched on the mechanical level.
Well,
here.
my wife always tells me that I'm way too emotional.
Really?
Oh yeah. My daughter, my 13-year-old daughter, makes fun of me because I cry at movies. And she just thinks that, well, we saw the end. We saw How to Train Your Dragon 3 recently, which is a really great movie. I totally recommend that franchise. The Dragons franchise is just a really good family fantasy series. But anyway, we went and saw How to Train Your Dragon 3, and I had misty eyes at the end. And my 13-year-old daughter looked over at me and saw me with misty eyes and was like, "Dad, this is a kid's movie."
Well, yeah, now I have a new goal on the show. It's kind of like Tony Stark in the first Avengers movie. Like, now my goal is to get the Hulk out. Like, I got to poke you somehow and find out how to bring out the emotional Josh here that's gonna sob on the show for me. No, and don't underestimate kids movies, because I feel like the older I get, the more kids movies actually mean to me, because now I have kids, and when I was watching kids movies as a kid, it's like, oh, this is fun and I'm done with it now. But now, like, you see, I watch Toy Story, man, and Toy Story tears me up. Like, what on earth? I don't know what happened to me, but Toy Story tears me up now.
Oh yeah, well, one of my favorite C.S. Lewis quotes is Lewis said that a children's story that cannot be enjoyed by adults is a bad children's story, and I totally agree with that as an adult. It's like, and there are so many really good children's stories, like the Dragons series, where kids who are 7, 8 years old, whatever, can watch that and totally enjoy it. But also me as an adult, as a father, can watch it and also enjoy it, even on the same and also on a higher level.
Man, here we are, and I totally missed our chance to get sponsored by Toy Story 4 this week. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Is that coming out this week? I think it is.
It's coming up real soon. Yeah, this week or next week.
I know the new Aladdin movie came out this week, but
Indeed.
That is a segue. Or not a segue. We're trying to avoid a segue.
So Princess Bride, I think, is where you left off.
There we go. Yes. So if this idea of falling in love and being in love with the one is a bad base for living your life, it's a bad way to define yourself. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that, why that's not a good way to live your life. I think the biggest one, when I think about it, is just that because it makes you passive. If you listen to all the pop songs, if you watch all the movies, what causes people to fall in love? Well, nothing does, right? You see the person and you see them, you make eye contact, and then slow motion begins and happy music plays, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Snap your fingers, you're in love, boom, you got it. And once that's happened, like Romeo and Juliet, once the slow motion has happened, the music is played, you fall in love. At that point, you have like this sort of a moral obligation, like you got to go pursue that person that you're in love with, because that's what's defining you now. That's what's making your life worthwhile. That's what you're going to go be reincarnated back on the earth for.
Right, which is reflected in people's use of the word chemistry.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yes.
When people talk about chemistry, like, that's it. It's just a reaction. There's nothing you can do about it.
Mm-hmm. So if that's what defines us, if who I fall in love with and feeling in love is what is going to define me as a person, what's going to define my worth, my priorities, what's going to define whether I'm happy or not, I've made myself at that point completely passive. It's like I have no control over when I feel this love thing. And so my purpose, my happiness, my identity as a person then has become dependent on what you said, on chemistry. I just got to wait for the reaction to happen. And
right, and it leaves a lot of people in an impossible position too, right? But like, I remember when I was single and I had all these people around me say, "Oh, don't worry, you'll find the one someday." And I'm like, okay, well, what if I don't? Like that leaves a lot of people in this helpless circumstance of just sort of waiting on fate. Mm-hmm. And that's a terrible place to be. No matter who you are, it's a terrible place to be.
Yeah, and it's not. I'm sure it's not a secret to our audience that we are. I guess we'll say we're not pro-gay. We're not on the.
Hey, speak for yourself, homeboy.
Homeboy. You just said homeboy, and you're like a grown-up man.
Yeah, no, I know, right? Well, grown up's a little bit of an exaggeration, but we have policy questions relating to marriage. How about that?
Sure.
I'm sure I think that's where you're going with it anyway.
Well, more or less. But so I would ask, why is it considered to be so important? Why is it so very, very vital that we have gay marriage, for instance? People think that's like a life and death, like human rights issue. It's like if you don't have gay marriage, then you're slipping back toward Nazism or whatever. Well, why is that? And I think that if you do have that paradigm, if you do believe that ultimately what's going to define your life, what's going to define your happiness is falling in love, one, and two, you can't control that. It's just going to happen someday. Well, then, if that's what you believe, then obviously if I fall in love with a guy, then what else am I supposed to do? If I fall in love with a man and you deny me the right to act upon that with marriage, then you basically, I might as well be dead, right? Romeo and Juliet, they're going to kill themselves, they can't be together. If that's what you think is actually normal and reasonable, then, well, obviously, yeah, you got to be able to marry whoever it is that you feel that feeling for.
Or whatever.
Whatever, be it a man, a woman, a goldfish, a chair, yourself. I saw another woman in England who married herself recently, not the first one to do that. But really, if life is all about this chemistry, this falling in love reaction that just happens to you, well, then, yeah, obviously, you've got to be allowed to marry whoever, whatever, because that's what you are.
Well, right. And the premise of marriage, I mean, I think that the part that really confuses me on is that the premise of marriage is not the exclusivity of love, right? The premise of marriage is the exclusivity of sex and finances. Like that's the point of marriage is a commitment involving exclusivity of sex and finance and economics. It's an economic and sexual union is what it is. It's not like I still love my mom. I still love friends. I still love family. Like it's not dictating who you can love. And unless you put all these weird arbitrary barriers up in, back to the beginning of the episode about what type of love, this kind, that kind, well, then it doesn't make any sense. And that's why like people who follow this it's kind of a wild notion, honestly, in my mind, that you have to do wherever your feelings lead you, you have to follow. It sort of leaves you chasing your tail in some ways. Oh
yeah, definitely. But like you said, yeah. So marriage. But that's another thing too. Is so what is marriage for? You just said marriage is primarily it's a sexual and a economic union. Of course, the sexual union being presumed to produce children. Doesn't always happen that way, of course, but that's the idea. And of course, if you produce children with somebody, that's also a very heavily economical thing. Mm-hmm. But and traditionally, I mean, going back through history, pretty much any culture you want to pick, that was the case. Oftentimes, parents would select who their children would marry. You might not even meet the person you're going to marry until the wedding. And societies ran like that, over thousands of years.
And still do in much of the world.
And still do. And that was because it was understood that marriage was a practical arrangement. It was a way of creating a family unit that was based upon duties. You marry a woman, and then it means you have duties toward her, and she has duties toward you, and those duties are what defined it. But we've totally thrown that away in American culture. I'll say in more generically in Western culture. Mm-hmm. And we've gone to this idea that marriage is just sort of it's how you act on being in love. 1969, if I recall correctly, I don't know when Shakespeare wrote, but I do, but I do know this date. 1969 was when California instituted the first no-fault divorce law in the United States, and all the other states piled onto that real fast. And of course, that's the case everywhere now in all the states. No-fault divorce. If you want a divorce, you can just have one. Which, if you understand divorce as being like a contract with duties, that seems crazy. Imagine you signed a contract with a business partner, and one day you decided, I don't like this contract, and so you just leave. It's like your business partner will sue you, and you're not allowed to do that. You can't break a contract like that. But the marriage contract, we sort of, in our culture, have made that a unique contract. Things break whenever you feel like it. And the reason for that is because we have come to view marriage as you want to say sort of a solidification or a formalization of that chemistry that you feel. And if at some point in the future you cease to feel the chemistry, you cease to feel in love, well, what are you doing there? If the purpose of marriage is to make you happy by tweaking your feelings and you're not getting the feels, then you want to get rid of that marriage just like any other possession you have that's not performing its function.
Yeah, and I think, if you want to, if this is going to be unpopular opinion time, okay, I've got a really unpopular opinion on this, and it's that I don't see, I really don't see a lot of problems with arranged marriages. Historically, as long as it's not unreasonable and it's, a 69-year-old marrying a 8-year-old, something ridiculous like that. I mean, arranged marriages, I have known people who have been in arranged marriages and they're very much in love. And it's not because they had that magical moment. Obviously, it's because they learned to love each other over the course of days, weeks, months, and years. I mean, that's and their marriages are very strong. Their families are very strong. They're happy, they're content, and they're fulfilled. And I look at that and go, well, one of two things, according to a modern American interpretation, right, it's one of two things happened. Either the two that their parents picked just happened to be the perfect two in the entire universe, as well as all their cousins and everyone else that goes through the same thing, or it's really not much about luck and chance and following somebody that gives you a funny feeling on the inside. It's more practical than that, which I think is what we're getting at. And I think that's reflected in the comparative divorce rates that we see now compared to before no-fault divorce here in the U.S. or compared to other parts of the world, frankly.
Yeah, I was going to do a theatrical gasp when you said that, but I forgot, so I'll do it now. You don't oppose arranged marriages, Joel? That's awful.
Well,
but
here's the terrible part about it is that you tend to be more open to things like that when you're older and you're not in the dating environment anymore. But when you're in the dating environment, if somebody says that, you just want to kill them. So,
well, I don't know. I never felt that way. Actually, when my wife, that was something that we discussed before we got married, and I found she thought the idea of arranged marriages made sense too, and I'm like, that's a point of commonality there. I like this woman's thinking. But that was because. So
did your parents hook you guys up?
No, we met in high school. So
okay.
It was quite.
So they sort of did.
I guess so. Yes, my parents sent us to the public high school where her parents sent her. So yeah, I guess they kind of hooked us up. But
delegation.
But yeah, and that's because no matter how strong your feelings are, it's like, and you can feel like this total raging mad love for somebody, but it won't last. It won't, because it's not the nature of any feelings to last. And it's like, no matter what it is that you love to do, if it's a job, a hobby, whatever it is that gives you good feelings, that thing will not always give you good feelings. That's not how you work. And it's not because the things that you have feelings toward are somehow defective or not doing their job correctly. It's because you as a human being are in constant flux and change. Your emotional state is highly dependent upon chemistry, your circumstances, the things that are happening in your work life, in your country, the things that your health, even just the changes in mood that come naturally to people. It's like no feeling is going to last. And so you can't have anything based upon that. And I don't know, I guess I would think somebody coming into an arranged marriage wouldn't have those sorts of expectations. And I feel like Americans nowadays are really burdened by those unrealistic expectations, this expectation that because they found the one, they're going to be happy all the time. And all their days will be sunshine because they'll always be able to just snuggle up to that special person and their embrace will fill me with this aura of love and I will just be at peace. And it's almost like, honestly, it's like people expect to get the sort of peace that God promises you through your relationship with him. God promises you the peace that passes understanding if you have faith in him. And people expect that from each other. People expect that they're going to get the peace that passes understanding from snuggling up to their partner. And if that's your expectation, you are in for some disappointment because that is not how people work.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's one thing to talk about all of this, theoretically as a couple of old, married dudes that are raising families and have already passed a lot of this, the whole relationship phase. But, I know younger people who are still single, who are struggling through all of this thing, and they are continually disappointed, continually depressed, often turning to, really unhealthy addictions or habits to cope with the fact that they've been so let down by other people in terms of love. And they keep, repeating this same insane process where I find somebody, I become infatuated with somebody, I, deliver my life on a silver platter to somebody, and then that somebody uses me and drops me. And eventually it just tears the soul right out of you. And so I mean it's one thing to talk about it academically, but people are living this, and there's broken lives all around us. And like you said, it's clear evidence that they're fishing for something there that is not meant to be gotten there. And I don't think you can separate a discussion of love. I mean, from where we're coming from, you can't separate a discussion of love from a discussion of God. You just can't. I mean, the whole God is love thing, everybody knows that, right? They might not know anything else about the Bible, but they're like, God is love, man. And that part is relevant because it's true, but it's not the reciprocal element is not true, right? Like, just because God is love doesn't mean love is God. There's a component, it's a component of his nature that's valuable and important. And if you look in the Bible, you see all different manifestations of it. I mean, I like to kind of remind people sometimes, you go to a wedding and you hear 1 Corinthians 13 and, oh, hey, this is what love really is. And that's, clearly that's a critical, really important passage. But there's more context, because if you go back to the Old Testament, you find some really disturbing situations where the word love is used. And, things involving, incest and horrible, rapes and things like that. And it's like, oh my gosh, like how can this word even be mentioned there? And I think it's denoting the kind of confusion that we have in our, in our generation around the word, is that people just confuse that, and it shows in the chaos in their lives and in their relationships.
Yeah, do you have an example of that in the Old Testament that you're thinking of?
Yeah, I do. So the one that I have such a hard time with is David's children. So you've got Amnon and Tamar, right? And it says he loved her, and he just loved his sister, and it was a really, really messed up deal, really, really messed up story. But in the end, it says, after he ends up basically, defiling his sister, it says he hated her with a hatred that was more than the love that he loved her with before. Mm-hmm. And it's just really like, again, though, that's what we're talking about here, right? If he followed his feelings, he followed his heart. It was a really messed up, nasty, horrible heart, and he followed it.
Amnon followed his heart. That's a good
that's right.
bumper sticker there.
And he ruined... And maybe in Texas, dude. But he ruined lives. I mean, he ruined lives. He ruined a family. He ultimately helped ruin a dynasty because of that. Because he followed his heart, followed his feelings, and those feelings passed as soon as they arrived. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, I think that's kind of a showcase of the danger that's involved there.
Oh yeah, I mean, you talk about David. I mean, obviously David and Bathsheba would be another case of the king following his heart, right? Or even then Absalom, again, taking revenge upon Amnon for the rape of his sister, also following his heart with disastrous consequences. So that just goes to show, as do so many other examples, that you follow your heart is, generally speaking, terrible advice, because the heart is fickle, and the heart is driven by passion and not by reason. So I don't know. You talked about people, and I know this is a common situation, even and perhaps especially, well, not especially, but even in Christian church communities, where you have people who would really like to be married, and they can't seem to pull it off. I mean, do you have any insight into that or advice?
I am not exactly sure. What do you mean they'd like to be married and can't, like they're running for their lives from a government that won't let them marry, or what?
Like they'd like to find a person to marry. Like, I am a single guy and I would like to find a wife, but I just can't.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. I mean, that used to be me at one point, to be perfectly honest. So I do. I mean, what the conclusion that I came to is, first of all, drop this. And I think it's just a dangerous lie that Christians hold to. Drop this, the one business. Okay.
Amen, Brother Joel.
I just don't, I think it's harmful. I think you take, young single people who should be focusing their time and efforts on the gospel and on ministry and on service and on even on career and achievement, who, then spend a bunch of time pining away playing video games, waiting for the one to walk into their lives. And I just think it ends up being really detrimental to have that image. But second of all, I look at what love actually is. If it's not a feeling, because we've talked about that over and over again, right? If it's not a feeling, what is it? It's a choice. And choice, when you realize that love is a choice and a commitment, then you have power, right? I can make a choice. I can make a commitment. That's something that's within my control. And in that sense, in that sense, it makes sense why you don't want to separate love into all these little subcategories and try to find out which one, each relationship belongs into, because it's all the same there. I love my kids. I have a commitment to them, and that doesn't mean that I wake up every single morning when I am tired and frustrated and sore and they're jumping on me. Like, that doesn't mean I wake up every single morning and go, oh man, this is just the best day of my entire life instantly. I know that I'm blessed and I know that I love them, but at that particular moment, I might not feel like it very much. But you know what? I'm still going to get up and I'm still going to go make a paycheck. I'm still going to go mow the yard. I'm still going to go take care of everything. I'm still going to make sure I spend time with them, even when I don't feel like it. Like, all of these things, that's because it's a choice. And what I've found in my life, and not just in relation to love, but, pretty much anything, feelings follow choice. If you're doing it the right way, feelings will follow your choices. They don't lead your choices. And that, I think, is where our society might have it more backward than anywhere else.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Yes. Very, very much agree with all of that. And that's the thing too, is it's like you said, you forget the idea of the one, because as we discussed, if you believe in the one, then you're passive. You're just waiting for it to happen. You're waiting for the chemistry to happen, waiting for the lightning to strike. But if you understand that it's all primarily about your choices, then you have agency and you have power to do something. And you're not at the mercy of these chemical whims.
Yeah, and there's also, there's agency there. It gives you the opportunity to truly self-analyze and to look at yourself in an honest light. And I know for a long time, I when I was single, I spent a lot of time sitting there wondering, why can't I find a person who, hits all these criteria? And I'm like, well, okay, but I'm not a person deserving of that. Like, I am not where I need to be to attract somebody on that level. So how could I expect that someone on that level would, be looking for me? And so it was very eye-opening when I saw that, and to come to the conclusion that this person that I'm looking to form a relationship with, my goal in it should not, like, if I'm going into it with the goal of, I want you to satisfy me, that's not love in the first place. That's the opposite, right? That's the wrong motivation, and it's the wrong goal in mind. It's when you find an opportunity to make that choice and make that commitment to give. I mean, to a large degree, love just means selflessness, right? Which is why, scripturally, the ultimate act of love is laying down your life for your friend, because that's the ultimate act of selflessness. If there's literally nothing else you can give. And that's what we see demonstrated throughout Scripture and throughout the love stories that have that should have shaped our understanding as a culture, is what I'll say, is that people give. And in that sense, it's not just romantic. I mean, you can extend that to people who die on the battlefield for love of family and country. There's just all over the place. That's the type of thing that has people running in, to save people out of a burning building. Like that. That's the kind of thing that motivates people to be greater than we are. And that's the love that I think I just wish that we could grab a hold of that version of it and pull it down to our society, because that can be exercised across the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the idea of laying down your life as being the ultimate act of love, it's like, why is that? If I lay down my life for somebody, then what I am saying through my actions is I consider you and your benefit and your well-being to be more important than my very life. Mm-hmm. And it's the ultimate act of respect. I am showing the ultimate respect for you by saying that you are so valuable that I consider you more valuable than my life. And we romanticize this idea of dying, this idea, well, you die for your love, isn't that romantic? But really, that attitude can carry through to everything. Because if I am living in such a way that I consider my wife or my family to be more valuable than myself, I don't actually have to die. I don't have to die to prove it. But if I am living in such a way that it is evident through my actions that they are more important to me than I am, so that's the love we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And all you have to really do to show that, I think, is to ask what was the defining moment, the love's defining moment in history. That was the moment of Jesus dying on the cross, right? Like, that was the ultimate act of love. At least as far as Christians are concerned, we look at that and we see that's the That's the total, that's the goal right there. That's the ultimate moment of love. And it was horrible. It was horrifying. It was ugly. It was not anything like When Harry Met Sally, except for you did say it was morbid, so maybe it's got that in common.
It was horrifying and ugly in other ways.
Right. But like that moment, the moment that most perfectly demonstrated love involved torture and death and blood and crucifixion and loss and grief and tears and sweat and all the things that we think of as just horrible as human beings, culminated in a perfect outpouring of love. And I just can't think of a better way to show that the way that it's supposed to be demonstrated in our lives is nothing like Hollywood would suggest. And I think, in the day-to-day life, in the day-to-day relationships that we have, especially within the context of marriage and family, it looks a lot like servanthood. I mean, and Jesus himself said, if you love me, you will
obey my commands.
Keep my commandments. He didn't say, if you love me, you'll kiss me on the cheek when I get home and say how great I am. He said, if you love me,
if you love me, right, you will feel lots of love in your heart.
Right. You will feel lots of love and you will tell me how much you love me. No, I mean, like he said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. And that's what it comes down to, right? That's why when I think of how much I love my kids, it's not just, I see their faces on my phone and it's like, oh, they're so cute. Like, yes, I do think that. But the way that I know I love my kids is that I wake up at 4 a.m. and clean their puke off the floor. Like that's love, because I don't do that for strangers. Like, that's not something I would do for other people. So like that's where it comes into play. And it's the same thing for my wife, day after day. She is maintaining a family. She's putting her own interests and her own dreams and goals past. And if you want a modern American example of that, probably the closest I could get would be George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, right? The whole theme of that movie is him putting himself behind others and putting the interests of others in front of himself. He loved his town. He loved his family. He loved the people around him. Like that was manifest in the choices that he made in his life, because it cost him something. If it doesn't cost you anything, is it really love to start with? It's just self-interest. And so I think that's kind of the question that I keep coming back to on this.
Well, yeah, and the pop music paradigm of love is all about self-interest. You watch that movie, listen to that song. When Harry and Sally, they're walking around searching for love in this movie, and it's not they're looking for someone to prioritize. They're not looking for someone to create a family with. They're looking for someone who will make them happy. It's all selfish. And that's the difference, I think, between this pop culture idea of love and the biblical idea of love. Is the pop culture love is one of consumption. I am looking for the person who's will gratify me. I'm looking for the person who, when I meet them, I will feel happy, and that's what I want. Whereas the biblical model of love is I am looking for the person whom I can pour myself into, not who will gratify me, but who I can pour myself into, and by doing that, create something greater.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a topic that we could probably put a pin in until next Valentine's Day. I imagine we could probably have a half dozen episodes on this, but it's a really important one though, because like you said, so many things, not just in terms of policy, but in terms of the culture that we have that's driving that policy, it's really dictated by what people feel about love. I mean, you can go back to John Lennon, all you need is love, right? There's all of these mantras that we've been throwing around our whole lives. And if you don't understand what the word love should mean and what it entails, you're going to get all this wrong, and you're going to end up very unfulfilled and depressed. And so, that's maybe a challenge for us to understand that better and spread it out. We hope you guys love this episode, because we certainly love all y'all. Only in the most real and philosophically true sense, of course. Make sure you get out and follow us on Twitter at The CI Show and at facebook.com/The CI Show, and show us some love online this week, if you would. Have a great week, and thank you for listening to Constructive Interference.